Hi, RedEye. I'm Steve James,
And I'm Chaz Ebert.
and we have the film Life Itself opening this Friday, July 4th, here in Chicago. You have to come. It's a movie about a movie guy, so you have to come.
Well, it's so nice to see you guys. I've been looking forward to this day for a while. Such a wonderful movie. Steve, we were just talking about just the widespread praise that you've gotten for this film and what a testament it is to Roger. And Chaz, I was saying to Steve, I think in particular, this is a movie that while everyone wants every movie to be good, I think this is one that everyone was hoping would turn out as good as it did.
Yeah, I think so. I think that there must have been tremendous pressure on Steve, and because not only was he making a movie about Roger, he's making a movie that film critics are going to see and that audiences who think they knew everything about Roger because he was so public for almost 50 years, they thought they knew. So I think there was pressure on Steve to really deliver, and I think he did.
It makes me, for some odd reason, think of my favorite moment in Blazing Saddles with Gene Wilder, where
Didn't expect you to say
Okay.
that. Go on.
Alright.
I wasn't expecting
Yeah,
to either.
all right.
So you can cut this out, but
No,
we're not going to.
no, they're not going to cut this.
Where-
I want to hear this.
where where he's a gunslinger, right? And he says he gets nervous, and the guy goes, "You don't look nervous. Your hand looks very steady." He goes, "Yeah, but this is the hand I shoot with."
Oh,
Remember that?
I remember that. Yes, I remember that scene in Blazing Saddles.
I know it's
Yeah.
a terrible segue, but no. But actually, the odd thing about this is that I didn't really get nervous about this film until well into it, in terms of the pressure and stuff. I was mostly just excited about the opportunity to do it because of reading the memoir. I thought it was amazing, and I certainly felt dishonored to have this opportunity. But it was. I mean, honestly, it was when Roger passed away that I suddenly realized, like, oh my God, there's maybe going to be other films made about Roger, but this will be the only one that he's fully participating in. And I mean, that's when it sort of dawned on me, like, there's more riding on this film than there was up till now.
Sure. Well, Chaz, I believe Roger told you when the movie started that he really wanted the film to be a portrait of the real man, not the icon.
Yes.
Can you tell me about were there additional conversations that you guys had about that? What would be involved in that type of presentation? Because it seems like he was so determined to be revealing and honest, and for obvious reasons, that was going to be very hard for you to see that unfold.
I think he thought that the iconic bit would be most of the things that people knew. And I think that's why he wanted Steve to delve a little deeper and, talk about, even though there was a column that Roger wrote about being an alcoholic, showing all of the things that maybe people didn't know about, how often he was at bars or, holding forth with his friends and all of the carousing he did. Maybe people didn't know as much about that. I think that Roger felt that if you made it more about the man, the human, that people would connect with it more.
Oh, of course. But was that something that you guys then talked about more in terms of anything that either one of you was like, well, maybe this shouldn't be in there, or like just kind of what that approach would mean, I guess.
Well, I didn't really want the medical procedure to be in there, for instance, because it's very, it was quite graphic, and it's very, for people who don't see it, I saw it every day. So for me, it's something that I could take, but it was extended on the film, and at first I didn't want it to see, having his airways cleared. Later in the film, I saw they made the right decision. Roger called Steve in to shoot that when I was out of town because he knew I wouldn't wanted to have it seen on the screen. But it actually makes the film better because people knew that Roger had a struggle. I mean, had it difficult after all the surgeries. People had no idea how difficult it was for him on a daily basis to do what he did.
What was your reaction when you came back into town and found out that had happened on camera?
I just said, this is the film Roger wants made. What can you do when you have a husband as strong-willed as Roger, and someone who has such a good sense of what's cinematic and what isn't? You don't argue with them. You just say, okay,
Well, and it's like, you know, when I filmed it that day, and I knew that Chaz didn't want us to film that because we had been there for a pre-production meeting right before we started shooting when he needed to have his air passage cleared, and she'd asked us to leave. And of course, I'll never forget Roger's reaction in the meeting, which was like, "Why? Why are you making them leave?" Right? They could communicate with just gestures, and she was like, "I know, you don't want him to see this, but it's just Roger, let me do this." And so I knew, but like you said a moment ago, it was an everyday thing, and so I felt and knew that we needed to see this, and Roger was right there with me on that, obviously. But I think after I filmed it, that was one of the things. I had a great DP in Dana Cupper, but I shot some of the stuff myself. So I'm sure after I pulled the camera down, I realized after filming it, like, why she really didn't want us to see it, because it is tough, and I understood it totally. I think he saw the look on my face of like guilt over it a little bit, because I think that's what prompted him to send.
Good that he had at least the sensibility to feel guilty about it.
But I think that's why he sent me the email later that I got when I got home that said, "Great stuff!" Exclamation! Exclamation! I'm so glad we got something today. Nobody sees suction. He knew that I was feeling like, oh, geez, and he wanted to let me know right then and there. This is at the very beginning of our filming, that I want this. This is important, and this is the kind of filming and the kind of film it should be. And that is so rare for any subject to take that point of view in a film about themselves, but it's especially rare with someone in that situation, and then on top of it to be someone who's famous like Roger, because usually famous people have a different definition of what candid and honest is. It's just not the same.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, one of the quotes that sticks out to me is that when he said it would be a major lapse to have a documentary that doesn't contain the full reality. And I was thinking about the fact that, very sadly, if there's a documentary that I feel isn't as good as it could have been, it's usually because it feels like it doesn't contain that full portrait. I mean, do you feel like a documentary that has that sense of honesty and reality is kind of in the minority ultimately?
Well, this is my take on it. I think that when Steve did Hoop Dreams 20 years ago, one of the reasons Roger championed it so much is he felt that Steve and Cartimquin Films had made sort of a new... They were evolving where documentary making was going. And I think with Life Itself, I think that Steve is taking it to another level. I don't even know how to explain all of the reasons why I think this is sort of a new stage of documentary filmmaking, but I do. And I think that Roger sensed that. And he wanted to go as far as he could go and be as honest. He liked gritty stuff. He liked, happy stuff too. But Roger liked seeing things stripped down to the bare essentials. And who are we at our core? Who are we when everything that we know and take for granted is taken from us? And, how do we survive that? He thinks that that's how his heart talks to your heart. He is us. He's not this icon. He is us.
Steve, do you feel like this was sort of a next level situation for you?
Well, it's really kind of Chaz to say that. I do know that when I got involved with this film, it is a bit of a departure from most of my work. The following of somebody's life, like we did with Roger and Chaz, is more my style, not a biographical film, and I've not done hardly any films that have to do with people who are famous in any way. Really, usually you've never heard of them until I've made the film. So for me personally, it was a creative step forward and a challenge because it was a different kind of filmmaking, and I was hoping to try to do something in the biographical realm with this film that maybe I hadn't seen. I'm not saying it hasn't been done, but that I hadn't seen. But every film, I think, documentary, the question of honesty and the degree and level of candor and honesty is a really interesting one, because I think that we as filmmakers, we aim for that, of course, and all documentary films should be honest and candid on some level, but there are degrees. And even within my own body of work, there are certain films where I feel like I got to a deeper level of that and revelation than other films. And this was certainly one with Roger and Chaz in the way in which they opened up their lives, where I felt I got deeply in. And because you're seeing Roger, we didn't start this film because we thought, he's going to die soon. That was not on anybody's mind. There was no expectation that what happened was going to happen. But when that did happen, then it did change what this film's about.
Of course. Well, and how much have you both thought about, if at all, how different the movie would have been if it hadn't so coincided with the health issues that he was facing?
Well, Steve had actually laid out how he wanted the film to go, and he had planned to shoot like maybe over a period of a year of Roger going to the movies, going to festivals, still speaking, at speaking engagement with his synthesized voice, doing things with doing everything, just out and about, us giving dinner parties, everything. So the whole portrait of it would have been a little different, and yet I think the essence of what Steve was going for is still all there. It's all on the screen, maybe even more so, because it's distilled and it's he dies. So
I mean, I think that the initial idea was to show how he continues to overcome and persevere and do it with a sense of humor, a drive, sometimes a stubbornness, an embracing, the way he extended himself to others, all those qualities. Yeah, and I think all those, like Chaz is saying, I think all those things are in the movie that we made. It's just that you also have this other thing going on, which is he's facing down the end of his life and doing all of that, which is all the more remarkable. But of course, we would trade all of that in a second to have him here be a part of this, because, I mean, he's so missed.
There was a sense that I had. I call it the universe speaking to me, and so I did call Steve over in December of 2012 because the universe spoke to me and said, if you don't get started making this movie, you're never going to make it. So whatever that is, or whatever that was, I didn't think it meant Roger's going to pass away 4 months into the making of it. I really, truly thought that Roger would be here to celebrate the end of the movie with us, but I knew we had to get started.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's so beautifully handled. Something that really interests me about the way you make movies, Steve, is what you've talked about, the collaborative process, the fact that you kind of maybe see yourself as different from some other documentarians who might go out there and look for total balance and not see it as much of a collaborative process with the subject. Has there ever been a time in any film that you've worked on where that created any type of internal struggle for you about what you felt like you needed to capture to show that total full portrait?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I mean, I think, yes, you're right. It's like I do think of these as more collaborative undertakings because I feel like that's where the trust comes from with subjects, with people in your film, which allows them to reveal themselves more. I mean, and in a sense, the more they feel like this is not something that's completely out of their control, and by that I don't mean they get editorial control, but that the process is more collaborative instead of me coming in and filming you, then the more revealing they are, the more they let go and show you who they are. And I've been fortunate with that over the years. But yes, there's been films, fortunately this isn't one of them, but there's been films where I'm capturing things about people that are far, far less flattering to them than they may feel like it is in the process of making it, and the film's going to have to take account of that and show that. And but I feel like I've got to face the music in those situations. And
have you had subjects like point those particular moments out to
you?
Because I thought this was a collaboration. I didn't know you were going to put this in.
I'm always very clear with people. Here's what I tell people. I say, look, I'm the filmmaker here. Obviously, I'm making the film, and I will have editorial control over this film. But my promise to you is that I will show you the film before it's done, and not like right before it's done and it's too late, but I'll show it to you before it's done, and we'll talk about it. And we'll talk about what is in this film that you think is fair. If you think there are things in here that are not right or I've got wrong or whatever, we'll talk about it. And I will listen to you. I will not promise you that I will make changes you want, but I promise you I will take it very seriously.
Can you give an example of a time when that conflict arose?
Well, yeah. I mean, on a film like Real Paradise, for example, I mean, that was a film about, John Pearson and Janet Pearson, two movie people. They had a lot of opinions about what I showed, and we had quite a vigorous discussion back and forth about that, particularly about how their daughter Georgia was portrayed in the film. And there were certain things that I heard and tweaked and adjusted, and there were other things I said, no, I'm sorry, this is the way it is. Probably more famously would be with Gene Pingatore in Hoop Dreams. When we showed him the film, it was a situation where partway in, when it starts to not be such a flattering portrait of him, we had to stop it and talk about it. And he took serious issue with what was in the movie. And I had established a really great relationship with Gene during the course of making the movie, and I liked Gene. But I also felt like he was also blinded to certain things that the film needed to show. And
did you keep those things in the
film? Oh yeah, no, it all stayed in. Yeah. But we talked about it, and I've done other films where I've made changes, where I've taken things. This process has always made the films I've done better. And it made it better even, I mean, we didn't have any big, things with Chaz, but when Chaz looked at it, there were only two people I showed this film to. Roger would have been the third, of course, if he'd have been around, but was Chaz and Marlene, Gene's wife. Those are the only two people I felt this obligation to show the film to because of their great importance to this story. And, with you, I showed it to Chaz, and we had a nice conversation about it. And there were certain things that got tweaked or changed as a result. One of them was, I mean, it's kind of funny, but one of them was, early on, Roger's barmates and colleagues talk about how he had the worst taste in women. Gold diggers and
you must love hearing about this.
And Chaz, one of the things Chaz said was like, okay, I understand why that's got to be in the movie, but can you somehow make a distinction between him then and now? And
that wasn't his permanent.
And she was right. She was absolutely right. And so we went back and we inserted where Bruce Elliott says, about these women is that back then in the bars or something to that effect. So that you understand that this was an early Roger thing, not a later Roger thing. And that's a small thing, but it is significant, and it's the kind of thing where your subjects point that out to you, and you're like, oh, of course, right, we've got to make that change.
And just for the record, I've known some of Roger's girlfriends, not all very early ones, and the ones I knew were not psychos or gold diggers.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, although the one I did meet, and I don't know her name, so I can't share it anyway, the one I did meet, that was an ex-girlfriend. I wouldn't say she was a psycho or a gold digger, but she was rather strange, I will say.
Okay.
Well, obviously, I'm a little biased in saying this, but I think it's so special the way that this movie feels. I mean, so much of Roger's life, of course, and this movie are so quintessentially Chicago. I mean, we are honored to have that moment towards the end with the RedEye box as someone who's going and taking out the issue.
So now I know why we're doing this interview.
Hey, that made me very happy. But we're proud to be seen that way.
You guys did that. It looked like a great supplement. I don't know if I have a copy of that.
Oh yeah, I could definitely track one down for you if you don't have one.
Okay, yeah.
But I mean, how much did you feel like this was, among other things, really a movie about Chicago and the movies and the way that Roger and Gene somehow made, to everyone's disbelief, Chicago this hub of film criticism and a place for the movies where so often everyone's just like, well, it's New York and LA and everything else. How much was that in your mind?
I'm going to let Steve answer that question, but I just have to say that Roger always said in his reviews and when we talked about movies that the more of a place you make the movie, the more universal it becomes. Some people are afraid that it makes it too provincial. He says it actually becomes more universal for some reason.
That's a great insight.
Yeah.
That's a great insight. Yeah, I mean, to me, this film is a series of love affairs, if you will. I mean, it's about Roger's love affair with journalism, with movies, clearly, with Chaz in a major way, and also his love affair with this city.
He loved Chicago.
You know, he came here from downstate Illinois, and you know,
and he loved his hometown too. I
hasten to add,
of course.
Yes,
and
yes.
was very dedicated to it. But
Yes.
it's like, you know, he is George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, but he gets to actually leave and go out and have this grand adventure in the world. And nobody had a grander adventure, I don't think, than Roger. And when he got to Chicago, Bill Nack says that in college, Roger planned to move on from Chicago eventually. He was going to be a novelist in New York. That's what Bill says.
But Roger never told me that.
And
maybe back then, maybe a long
as a
time
young
ago.
man, absolutely, I could
He
totally
could have,
see it.
yeah.
But once he got to me, it's a greater statement of his love for the
Yeah.
city. He got here, he stayed here because he fell in love with this place. It was who he was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Chicago really is the quintessential American city. It really is, not just because it's in the heartland, but because it has everything about, I think, what defines the American character, if you will. And I think when he got here, he saw that, if he didn't see it before, and he never left because he didn't want to leave. He could have, as the film makes clear, but he didn't want to.